soft, uneasy background tone, like a low wind or faint church bell. What happens when fear takes over an entire community? When neighbors start turning against neighbors, and innocent people are put to death because of nothing more than suspicion? This isn't a horror story. This really happened. In 1692, the quiet village of Salem, Massachusetts, was torn apart by one of the most infamous events in American history. Over the course of a year, more than 200 people were accused of witchcraft. 19 were hanged. One man was crushed to death under heavy stones. It all started with 2 little girls, strange behavior no one could explain, and a town ready to believe the devil was walking among them. This is the story of the Salem Witch Trials. Faint sounds of a crackling fire, soft and steady. To understand Salem in 1692, you have to picture the world these people lived in. It was a small farming village in Colonial, Massachusetts, only a few hundred people. Life was strict, harsh, and deeply religious. The people of Salem were Puritans, Christians, who believed their community had to stay pure and free from sin. Every part of life revolved around the church. Missing a sermon or questioning authority could make people suspicious of you. And above all, they believed the devil was real, and that he was always trying to tempt people into evil. To them, witches weren't just stories. They were servants of the devil, working in secret to destroy the community. The timing didn't help either. The region had just gone through smallpox outbreaks. Native raids threatened the colony. Families argued over land and property. People were stressed, fearful, and looking for someone to blame. So when 2 young girls started acting strangely, it was the perfect spark in a town already filled with tension and fear. Background: faint whispering wind, uneasy silence between words. In January of 1692, the strange behavior began. It started with 2 young girls, Betty Paris, just 9 years old, and her cousin Abigail Williams, who was 11. They were the daughter and niece of Reverend Samuel Paris, the local minister. Almost overnight, the girls began having violent fits. They screamed, they threw things, their bodies twisted in ways that frightened everyone watching. They said they were being pinched and pricked by unseen hands. Sometimes they claimed to see visions of shadowy figures. The local doctor was called, but he found no physical cause. And so, in a deeply religious community, there was only one explanation left: the devil. The girls must be under the spell of witches. The pressure was on them to name who was doing this to them. And soon, they did. The first 3 accused were women who already lived on the margins of Salem society. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar. Sarah Osborne, a woman who rarely went to church. And Tituba, an enslaved woman from the Caribbean, working in Reverend Paris's household. For the frightened villagers, this seemed to confirm their worst fears. The devil wasn't outside their walls. He was inside their own community. And the accusations had only just begun. Background: slow, steady drumbeat, almost like a heartbeat. Once the first accusations were made, Salem began to unravel. What started with 3 women quickly spread to dozens of others. The girls who claimed to be afflicted said more and more names were tormenting them, and the villagers believed them. Why? Because in their minds, the devil's tricks were everywhere. If children were being attacked by invisible spirits, then the entire community was in danger. Soon, people who had been respected for years were suddenly accused. Martha Corey, a loyal churchgoer. Rebecca Nurse, a grandmother loved by many. Even children weren't safe from suspicion. And here's where it became a deadly trap. If you were accused, you had 2 choices: confess and name others to prove you had turned away from witchcraft, or deny it. and risk hanging. Confessing meant survival, but it also meant spreading the panic. One accusation created 3 more, and 3 created 10. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Old grudges came back to life. Disputes over land, inheritance, or personal feuds could suddenly become matters of life and death. By the spring of 1692, Salem was no longer just a town. It was a battlefield of suspicion, and no one could be sure who might be named next. Background: muffled crowd noise, like a tense gathering, fading in and out. By the spring of 1692, the Salem meeting house had turned into a courtroom, and what happened inside those walls was nothing short of madness. Hundreds of villagers packed the room to watch the trials. The accused stood before judges and ministers, while the afflicted girls screamed, cried, and claimed to see spirits attacking them right there in the courtroom. Every outburst, every gasp, every tear was taken as evidence. The judges allowed something called spectral evidence. That meant if someone claimed they saw your spirit in a dream or in a vision, it could be used against you. No proof was needed, no witnesses, just the word of another person. And in Salem, that was enough. Imagine standing there accused, while children shrieked that your ghost was pinching them. How could you possibly defend yourself? If you got angry, it proved you were guilty. If you stumbled over your words, it was said the devil was speaking through you. And if you stayed calm, well, that just meant you were hiding your evil too well. The trials weren't really about finding the truth. They were about feeding the hysteria. And as each case ended, the fear grew stronger, and the list of the accused grew longer. Background: heavy silence, broken only by the sound of distant wind and the creak of rope. By the summer of 1692, the trials had moved past accusations and into something far darker. The courts were handing down death sentences, and in Salem, those sentences were carried out. The first to die was Bridget Bishop. She was a woman known for speaking her mind, dressing in bright colors, and not quite fitting the Puritan mold. In June, she was hanged on Gallows Hill. Her crime? The jury decided she was guilty of being a witch, based on nothing more than rumor and fear. After Bridget, the executions continued. One by one, wagons carried men and women to the gallows. Sarah Good, a poor beggar, was hanged in July. Her final words were said to be a curse on the minister who condemned her. Rebecca Nurse was next, a grandmother in her 70s, loved and respected by many in town. John Willard. George Burroughs, a former minister, who stunned the crowd by reciting the Lord's Prayer perfectly before his execution, something many believed a witch couldn't do. For a moment, people doubted. But the judges pushed forward, and he was hanged anyway. In total, 19 people were executed by hanging. But one man suffered an even crueler fate. Giles Corey, an elderly farmer, refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. He knew that if he stood trial, his property would be taken from his family. So he stayed silent, hoping to protect his land for his children. The court responded with a brutal punishment called pressing. They stripped him down, laid him in a pit, and placed heavy stones on his chest, demanding that he speak. He never gave in. Each time they asked for his confession, he had only 2 words: more weight. He was crushed to death after 3 days of torture. His courage became legendary, but his death showed just how far Salem's madness had gone. By the end of the trials, dozens sat in prison. 19 had been hanged, and 1 man had been pressed to death under rocks. The executions left a stain on Salem that would never fade. Husbands lost wives, children were left without parents, and the community began to wonder, had they truly destroyed witches? or had they killed their own innocent neighbors? Background: softer tone now, less menacing, almost like a dawn breaking after a storm. By the fall of 1692, the frenzy in Salem began to crack. The very system that fueled the trials started to eat itself alive. At first, it was easy for the villagers to believe that outsiders, beggars, or unpopular neighbors were witches. But as the accusations spread, the finger-pointing reached people who were well-respected, wealthy, and even connected to the powerful. When Rebecca Nurse, a kind and deeply religious grandmother, was executed, many began to whisper that something wasn't right. When John Proctor, a strong and outspoken farmer, was accused, even more people grew uneasy. And when George Burroughs, a Harvard-educated minister, was hanged despite praying on the gallows, doubt spread through the crowd. If someone as holy as a minister could be condemned, then who was safe? Even the governor's own wife, Lady Mary Phipps, was accused of witchcraft. That was the breaking point. Governor William Phipps realized the trials had gone too far. He ordered the use of spectral evidence to stop, and by October he dissolved the special court that had been carrying out the executions. For the first time in months, the hanging stopped. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.